So my name is Maya Vemrasa. I am actually, the slide is dated. The number should be 27 now, not 26. Another year has gone by. But I am the author of a book titled The Green Amendment, and actually founder of the National Green Amendments for the Generations movement, which is the very topic that we're going to talk about this evening. But I've also had the honor of, for the last 27 years, of serving as the Delaware Riverkeeper and leader of a 4-state organization called the Delaware Riverkeeper Network, an advocacy organization that does litigation and advocacy and really fights the good fight for our beautiful Delaware River. And it is as an outgrowth of that work as the Delaware Riverkeeper that I've come to this place of founding this Green Amendments for the Generations concept movement initiative. And I'm hoping to be able to work with many of you to advance this idea in the state of Washington, assuming that you find it as exciting as I do. So the Green Amendments for the Generations initiative is really, or movement, it's really all about advancing a new and needed path for environmental protection in the state of Washington and frankly beyond. And when I, talk with people about the need for a new path for environmental protection, those of us who work in the environmental arena or think about the environment at all, often very quickly jump to the question of, why do we need a new path for environmental protection? After all, we have hundreds of thousands of laws and regulations, policies, programs, agencies in Washington and beyond, right, across the United States of America, that are all supposed to be dedicated to protecting our environment for all people. So how is it possible that we need something else? And how, truthfully, is it possible that there's space for something else? Well, the problem is we do have this very significant body of law, regulation, policy, program, and agencies, but the way our system of government in Washington and really across the nation is set up when it comes to environmental protection is it's really set up to think about environmental protection primarily at the end of the decision-making process, when we're really focused on permitting. What are the permits that we're gonna issue to manage the who, the when, the where of the pollution and degradation that we've already accepted is going to happen as a foregone conclusion? Our system of law and governments is not focused on prevention of pollution, prevention of degradation from the beginning of the decision-making process. And there are a lot of gaps in the laws. There are a lot of things that are not regulated at all, or not regulated until too late. PFAS is a perfect example. That's a man-made family of toxic chemicals that for years and years has been left unregulated. And at this point has proliferated and contaminated drinking water supplies and people's bodies across the nation. That's been allowed to happen because of an absence of environmental protection law and regulation. And there are many, many examples like that. Fracking is another example where, needed protections came way too late, right? Now the cat's out of the bag. All too often, there's poor implementation of even the laws that we do have on the books. And inevitably at one point or another, even when we do feel like we have a law that's really robust and doing a good job, somebody gets in political office that doesn't appreciate the power and importance of environmental protection and works hard to roll back those laws. And of course, and very sadly, environmental racism is built in to this system of laws and continues to proliferate across Washington, across our nation. And so that communities of color, indigenous communities, immigrant and low-income communities continue to be targeted, right, for, unfairly targeted for highly polluting industrial operations and environmental degradation. And so as a result, we have people across the state and across the nation who are drinking contaminated water, breathing contaminated air, species of all kinds are being harmed. We're facing a climate crisis and much, much more. And so we can just see by that brief review of our system of laws and by what's actually happening on the ground, we can see that something's missing when it comes to environmental protection. And so the question is, what is that something missing? Well, this gentleman, Senator Franklin Curry, was actually a Pennsylvania legislator. And many years ago, he recognized that a very important something missing when it comes to environmental protection in his state was that the rights to a clean and healthy environment were not given this highest constitutional recognition and protection. We were not raising up the rights to clean water, clean air, a stable climate, and healthy environments. So they were given that most powerful constitutional protection in the Bill of Rights section of our state and federal constitutions. And as a result, our environmental rights were not protected as powerfully as those other fundamental rights we hold dear. Things like the right to free speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, and more. I just said that. We were not raising up environmental rights, right, with that same most powerful protection. And so Senator Curry, actually years ago, decided that he was going to change that in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And he proposed and succeeded in securing an amendment to the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution that would recognize and protect the rights of all people in the state to clean air, pure water, and a healthy environment, and the duty of all government officials to protect the natural resources of the state for the benefit of both present and future generations. Now, this amendment actually got added to the Pennsylvania Constitution 50 years ago, very literally. And so you would have thought that environmental protection in Pennsylvania would have been very, very powerful from that moment on. Unfortunately, very early on, there was a real misuse in how people sought to use this newly minted constitutional right. And so the Pennsylvania courts declared this language to be just a statement of policy and to not have the same legal strength as the other provisions in the Bill of Rights section of the state, Bill of Rights section of the state constitution. And that's the way things stood for 42 years in Pennsylvania. There was this powerful language in the Constitution, but nothing had really changed when it came to environmental protection. Because if you know anything about the law, you know that policy is just good advice. And like any good advice, you can take it or you can leave it. And in Pennsylvania, they left it all this time. It was during that 42 years that fracking came to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, bringing with it all of its highly polluting industrial operations, right? The devastation of our natural resources and landscapes, contamination of the water, streams and rivers, groundwater, even drinking water, right? The release of air pollution, including climate changing methane emissions. And it brought with it, sorry, I have to move my little thing. And it brought with it the proliferation of infrastructure, pipelines, LNG export facilities, compressor stations, and more. And the thing is, in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, given the state of the law at that time, it was really pretty easy for the frackers to overwhelm Pennsylvania's communities and environments. But the frackers and their legislative buddies wanted to find a way to make it even easier. And so actually in 2012, the Pennsylvania legislature passed a very pro-fracking law that was called Act 13, that was literally a gift basket to the industry, put in place automatic waivers from environmental protection standards. It relieved the industry of the obligation to notify people on private drinking water wells that their drinking water had become potentially contaminated by fracking operations. It took from municipalities their zoning authority and mandated that fracking operations be allowed to happen in every part of every community, including in the heart of the residential districts. And so while things were bad in Pennsylvania when it came to fracking at this point, with the passage of Act 13, if it had been implemented, things were going to get exponentially worse. Now, in my role as the Delaware Riverkeeper, and we at the Delaware Riverkeeper Network have been fighting fracking for many, many years. And that's a wonderful and powerful story in and of itself, which continues. But we knew, right, when this law was passed, that we had to add it to our palette of anti-fracking work. We had to stop this law before it started. The thing is, what we also recognize as activists is when you have a law that's passed by the legislature and signed by the governor, you don't really have too many options to deal with it. You can protest, you can try to get the law amended or repealed. Those things weren't going to make a difference in Pennsylvania. You can try to elect better people to office. That would come too late. You can accept it and move on. We weren't going to do that. So we had to find another way to challenge it. And we remembered that in the Bill of Rights section of the Pennsylvania Constitution, there was this long ignored environmental rights amendment, Article 1, Section 27, that did protect the environmental rights of the people of Pennsylvania. And so we decided that we were going to challenge the provisions of Act 13 that were so problematic, challenge them as being a violation of that long ignored environmental rights amendment. We were joined by 7 towns who brought their own legal arguments to this joint venture, but we focused on the environmental rights claim. This case went all the way up to the Pennsylvania Supreme Court, which was very conservative at the time, led by a very conservative Chief Justice. And in December of 2013, we got an amazing victory written with the plurality opinion written by that Chief Justice. I want you to read with me a few of the things that Chief Justice Castile wrote in his opinion. He wrote that by any responsible account, the exploitation of the Marcellus Shale Formation will produce a detrimental effect on the environment, on the people, their children, and future generations. That the natural resources that would be harmed by the drilling and fracking operations were resources that were essential to life, to health, and to liberty, and that as a result, the provisions of Act 13 that we were challenging were in fact a violation of the Environmental Rights Amendment of the Pennsylvania Constitution, and therefore were unconstitutional and could never be allowed to advance. And so in that moment, with that victory, right, we defeated some of the most devastating aspects of Act 13. But more than that, we breathed legal life into this long ignored environmental rights amendment and restored to the people of Pennsylvania their constitutional right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment. Now, as you can imagine, since that victory, we started working very, very hard, right, to take advantage of this newly enlivened environmental rights amendment and to really define what it means to have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment and to defend that right. And we've been doing so with wonderful success. But as we were doing that work, I kept thinking about the power and importance of what we had accomplished. And I very literally had what I call a Green Amendment epiphany. I realized and recognized that there was more in this victory than just for the people of Pennsylvania. That there was a message for all people in all communities across our nation. The message that our rights to a clean and healthy environment are worthy of Bill of Rights recognition and protection, and that we needed communities across the nation to rise up and demand and defend our environmental rights, and that the best way that they could do that would be to rise up with a Green Amendment movement, seeking and securing the passage of these most powerful constitutional environmental rights amendment in every single state constitution across the nation, and ultimately at the federal level. And why do I say we need a movement? We need a movement because I have looked at every single constitution, and I can tell you that there are only 2 states, Pennsylvania and Montana, that give this highest recognition and protection to the environment. There are a whole boatload of other states that talk about the environment in their constitutions in a variety of ways, but only those 2 states raise it up to that highest level, so our environmental rights are on par with those other fundamental rights we hold dear, like free speech and freedom of religion. And so what is it? What is it that's different about what Pennsylvania and Montana have that the other states don't have? Well, what's different is what I have now come to define as the elements of a Green Amendment, right? So a Green Amendment is not just any language in the Constitution. It is language that meets certain minimum criteria essential for giving this highest recognition and protection to environmental rights. Amongst those criteria, not all of them, but amongst those criteria is that the language must be in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. So very literally, environmental rights are physically and legally on par with those other fundamental rights. It must recognize the rights of all people, including future generations. It has to be clear that it's protecting fundamental rights like clean water and clean air, a stable climate and healthy environments, as opposed to things like fishing, hunting, trapping, and navigating, which may very well be things that people really appreciate, but are fundamentally different than clean water and clean air, which we all need. The language has to be self-executing, meaning that it has legal life standing on its own as soon as it's added to the Constitution, and it has to apply throughout every level of government in the state. Now, what does Washington have? Washington is one of those states that has quite a bit of language, right? Quite a bit of language. But this is not language that's in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. This is not language that's talking about clean water and clean air, right? It's talking about the use of water for irrigation and mining. That's different than you and I having a right to clean water and clean. Anyway, it's talking about all kinds of things, but it doesn't fulfill the elements of a constitutional Green Amendment. So something like this is needed, or there's opportunity for it in the state of Washington. Now, I want you to know, right, that I have at this point, started this Green Amendment movement. I did write the book and I started the organization and I defined the term, and I've really been going out there sharing the message. I'm not trying to convince anybody to do anything. Like if somebody doesn't want this in their state, I think that's a shame, but I'm not there to tell you what you need in your state. I'm here to tell you about this powerful opportunity and why I think it's so important. And if you want to pursue it, to say that all I ask is let me be a partner in the effort, because I have a lot of experience and knowledge to share. And one of the reasons why I have a lot of experience and knowledge to share is not only because of my work in Pennsylvania that did breathe legal life into Pennsylvania's Green Amendment and define the term and all that good stuff, but very literally have been working in 13 states now to advance this idea. And one of those states is Washington, because Representative Deborah Kanoff, she heard about this idea at a conference before the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, and she was immediately on it. And she said, Maya, I want this idea in the state of Washington, and has been a really powerful voice for why this is such a compelling and important idea. And so we have worked together and gotten input from others, looked at what the other states are pursuing, and she has put forth some really powerful language that really represents the interests and the goals of the people of Washington. Now, before we go to Q&A, I just want to talk a little bit broad strokes about how a Green Amendment changes things when it comes into play. Again, big picture, but then I can also give you a few examples of how it's played out in some litigation, or some real world examples. It's not all litigation. So first off, environmental rights are given that highest legal standing. And you can just think about how powerfully the rights to free speech, freedom of religion, private property rights, even gun rights. Think about how powerfully those rights are protected because they're in the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution. That same strength now comes to bear for the environment. Necessarily, a Green Amendment reorients government decision-making so that it is now focused on prevention of pollution, degradation, and harm from the beginning of the decision-making process. Because by its placement, by its terms, by its nature, a Green Amendment is a restraint on government action. It is not a grant of new authority to the government to act on behalf of the environment. The government already has the power to do that. What it's saying is that the government is prohibited from infringing on our environmental rights when it's governing, which is how the Bill of Rights works, right? When you have a right to free speech, that's about saying government, when you're governing, you can't do it in a way that infringes on our speech rights. Same thing now comes to bear for the environment. The only way that government can fulfill that kind of constitutional duty and obligation is to make sure that from the get-go, when there might be environmental implications, that it's working to avoid pollution and degradation in order to avoid that kind of infringement. It means that every government official at every level of government, from the local town council to the state legislators, all the way up to the governor's office, become duty bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people. And they have to protect those rights for both present and future generations. Adding that generational perspective is really powerful when we're thinking about environmental protection. It is very powerful from an environmental justice perspective. Because now all people, regardless of their race, their ethnicity, their socioeconomics, we all have the same constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. And every government official becomes constitutionally bound to protect the environmental rights of all the people equitably. No longer can there be environmental sacrifice zones where one community is constantly and consistently and disproportionately impacted in order to protect everybody else that's more affluent and politically connected. Informed decision-making is a must-have, because the only way, again, government can fulfill their duty of really ensuring that they are protecting environmental rights, not infringing on environmental rights, is to understand what are the existing conditions already facing a community. What are going to be the implications of the actions, the decisions, this new highly polluting industrial operation for people's environmental rights? What will be the cumulative impacts? That becomes part of not just like NEPA, where you gather the information and put it on the shelf and ignore it. But if government officials are going to be able to demonstrate that they fulfill their constitutional duty, they have to show that they gathered that information and put it to work in their decision making.
Maya, the representative has rejoined us.
Oh, wonderful. Okay, so I will just take a pause there and I will stop my screen share and let Representative Deborah Kanoff, our Green Amendment champion in the state of Washington, and on so many wonderful things, have the podium.
Oh my gosh, thank you. Well, I tell you, in Washington state, we still have issues with broadband and internet services. And I think we as state legislators need to do something about that. And I say that because I started out with you, Maya, and I was on the Nisqually Indian Reservation down by Olympia, by our state capitol, and our internet service went out. So I raced down the road and got to my hotel room, and now I'm all here and I'm all yours. So Maya, it's been just so enjoyable to be your partner and your champion on changing the face of who we are going to be in Washington state and across this nation. Many of you may not know who I am and where I come from, so let me do my traditional introduction. So I'm Representative Deborah Kanoff out of the 40th LD, which is located up in the northwest part of Washington state. I have the pleasure of representing the beautiful San Juan Islands, which is one of the most treasured places throughout the United States. And Sharon Bruja, I see that you're joining me from San Juan Islands. We love you so much, a climate change champion. But I also represent Bellingham and South Wacom there, Anacortes, and the mighty Skagit, which is, hello, David and Jerry, good to see you, which represents, the Skagit watershed provides one third of the fresh water into the beautiful Sailor Sea. So I take my responsibility to natural resources and the environment very strongly. I am also the only Native American to serve in the entire state legislature, which is not a weight, but an honor, because I not only represent protecting salmon resources and a climate change fighter for Washington state, but I'm also a leader within representing tribal voices of 29 federally recognized tribes in Washington state. Now let's hear this. I shared my Tlingit culture and background with you because it's very important for me to share. Naturally, I am brought up and raised culturally to take care of the environment and natural resources, because my features, my values, my tradition, my Tlingit name, Hicks-Jasi, is intertwined within cool and clean water, which is found up in the tributaries where the baby frogs come. My Tlingit background and my Tlingit features are intertwined within the foods that I eat. It's within the natural resources that surround me. So it is just natural for me to want to protect the environment, to want to make sure the resources are here for generations to come. Because once the cool and clean water is gone, once the salmon are gone, once the baby frogs are gone, which is who I am as a Native American person, then my whole culture is gone. My Tlingit name that's been passed down for generations to generations, 10,000 years of knowing is how old my name is, will no longer exist without the environment and the natural resources. It is natural for me to say it is my inherent and bloodline right to protect the environment and to protect the natural resources. But you know what's even better is I have wonderful friends like Sharon, David, and Jerry, who are my neighbors, who call this beautiful Salish Sea their home. It is where they have raised their children. It is where they live in the San Juan Islands and take care of the killer whales, the salmon, the eelgrass, the herons, the bald eagles. They are the ones who I'm fighting for as a state representative, because it is their right as a human being to have a clean environment, to breathe clean air, to have cool water, to have natural resources. It is just a little change in the Washington State Constitution, just a little change. And it's just simple for me as a Washingtonian, to say, hey, Sharon, David, and Jerry, you deserve a healthy environment. You deserve this as a Washington citizen. It is not an inherent right for you. It is the right as a citizen of this great nation. Every person in this great nation should have that right. Now, I'm here to tell you that we're going to rise up in Washington State. We dropped this little bill, this little one sentence change, a healthy environment for all. Every Washingtonian deserves that right, because we feel in Washington State that we should lead it. We should lead this effort. We passed some of the strongest climate change bills in the past 2 years. We have a governor who lives and breathes and has spoken about climate change since he was a congressman back in Washington, D.C. We are leading this fight. We're going to lead this fight. We have great champions such as Chairman Joe Fitzgibbon in the Environmental and Energy. We need to push him to be able to move this little right. This last year, we passed the HEAL Act, a healthy environment for all. This really is a bill that represents our communities of color and our rural communities who face some of the highest pollution rates across the state. We're raising in a healthy environment for all to help our underrepresented communities and our rural communities. This little constitutional change just raises that awareness higher to every Washington citizen. So you don't have to be a person of color who's a victim of a pollution-based economy. You don't have to live in a rural community. This means every Washingtonian will get environmental protection. So I'm gonna pause there, Maya, because I was really excited. You could tell I drove really fast. I didn't get caught, but I made it here. And I'm sorry that I have to run and I'm not here to stay for the rest of Maya's presentation. I'm actually jumping on to Congresswoman Del Bene's event this evening, and we'll be talking, working, and getting that great champion who's fighting for infrastructure money for us back into the state legislature. So Maya, I'm going to turn it back over to you. Great. And thank you for having me.
No, thank you. You all in Washington, you know it. You couldn't have a better champion for the environment, for social justice, and for all things right. So we're so honored to work with Representative Kanoff. She's just a powerhouse and a real leader in this movement. And you know, other states are really looking to her and listen to her when she speaks about this because she's so eloquent and powerful. So thank you so much. We were glad that you could pop in. So. All right, so I will go back to my screen share and try to get us back to where we were. Make sure I slideshow play from current slide. So, okay, so really quickly. So one of the things, you know, sometimes people say, oh my gosh, if we pass a green amendment, all the laws will be thrown out. But that's not true, right? You have a system of laws in Washington. And what the Green Amendment will do, right, is just help strengthen how those laws are interpreted when it comes to environmental protection, because now they can be utilized and they need to be utilized and interpreted through that lens of how can these help ensure that we are protecting the environmental rights of all people. The law will, or the amendment will really help fill the gap. So if you think about an area of law like PFAS, where we have that man-made family of chemicals largely unregulated, well, if at the time when industry was trying to use these chemicals, right, if there had been a green amendment, then regulators who wanted to like take a step back and keep that bad stuff from getting into the environment could have relied upon their duty to protect the rights to clean water of all people as a way to say no, even though we don't have a legislation or regulations that prohibit the use of this toxin, we know it's toxic. We're concerned about it getting into the environment, so no, you can't use it. Or if they hadn't done that, fast forward, you have PFAS in the environment. If there had been a green amendment, people could rely on the green amendment and say to their government officials, hey, I have a right to clean water. You have a duty to protect it. And they could have relied directly on the constitutional language to secure that protection sooner. The goal of a green amendment really is to get better government decision-making in the first place. The reality of a green amendment is when our government officials get it wrong, people can have immediate access to the courts to try to vindicate their constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment. And it's not just about changing the law, it's really about changing the way people think about their environment and their rights to an environment. And it's the way environmental activists are viewed by everybody else, right? So often now we're just dismissed when people want to as tree huggers and fish lovers. We're job killers, right? We're not in my backyarders. Well, and sometimes, right, for people who are not natural activists, when they step up to the podium to advocate for that woodland or wetland or whatever in their backyard, these kinds of attacks really shut them down and do quiet them, which is, of course, the goal. But the thing is, if we have a constitutional right to a clean and healthy environment, it's now about battling for our rights, for our inherent and indefeasible rights that belong to us, to present and future generations, rights that are not given by the law, but rights that we have by virtue of the fact that we are people here on this earth and that we are entitled to have protected by the Constitution and by the law. Right? It is about now, it's the whole conversation is now about defending the Constitution and defending our rights, not just about the things we love about nature, right? So what I often say to people is now, if you're up there at the podium and you're talking about environmental rights, right? You are talking about good things when it comes to protection of nature and protection of people, but you're also a US patriot because that's what patriots do, right? Patriots fight for our Bill of Rights. So if you have a constitutional green amendment, that's what you're doing, and nobody can debate that. Green amendments are making a difference through advocacy and through litigation. And I do have some case examples, but I feel like we're sort of getting on in time. And so I don't want to overwhelm you with that unless questions come up. But what I do want you to know is that the green amendments in Pennsylvania and Montana are protecting our environments. They're protecting woodlands from being cut down. They're protecting the misappropriation of natural resource monies. They are preventing laws, right? Like that pro-fracking law I talked about. They are securing cleanup of long ignored toxic sites. They're really making a difference when it comes to environmental protection. And so the question for Washington State is whether or not Washington is in that moment in time when the people are willing and wanting to see that there is something missing in the law, that they need something better, and that something better is available in the passage of a constitutional green amendment. Now, I know there has not been a proposal yet put forth for 2022, and there may be some modifications, which happens all the time, right? People learn lessons. And I think there are going to be some modifications, but this is the language that was advanced last year by Representative Kanoff. And as you can see in section 1, it's really talking about the rights of present and future generations to pure water and clean air and healthy ecosystems. It includes very directly a stable climate. It talks about the preservation of the natural, cultural, scenic, and human health values of the environment. It recognizes the duty of all government officials to serve as trustee of the natural resources, and it speaks directly to that issue of environmental justice. So Washington State has really powerful language that has been advanced, and that I think with some slight modification based on some of the feedback from last year is going to be advanced again, but in a slightly modified form. But I can't speak for the representative. I just know the conversations that have been happening and some good points that were made on the record last year. And as a smart leader, she takes good points into consideration when she's doing her work. So with that, I want you to know that we do have, if you go to www.wa for Washington, greenamendment.org, you can find more information specific to the Washington Green Amendment, some talking points and other good information. And as things advance, we will make that site more and more robust. And as partners come on wanting to work on this collaboratively, we will make sure that all partners are recognized. So with that, I'm going to stop my screen share. And it's probably easier with such a large group if people put their questions in the chat. If you really feel the need to say it, that's fine. Just, raise your hand, but otherwise you can put it in the chat and we'll try to pick them up. Molly will help make sure we don't miss any. So we have a good morning from Pakistan. Good morning. And a comment that this seems pretty smart. I would agree. How about a Texas style bounty on environmental criminals? A little bit of a different concept. Molly put the website in the chat and some information if you want the book. So there are no questions yet. Oh, how is stable climate defined, or a stable environment, stable climate and defined? So that's a great question. So people always ask, how is pure water defined? How is clean air defined? How is stable climate? Like, how are all these terms defined? They sound pretty broad. And the truth is, they are pretty broad by design. All language in the Bill of Rights section of a state constitution is broad, right? Like, what is free speech? Does it mean that if Representative Kanoff told me tonight to shut up, that she's infringed on my free speech rights? Like, is that an infringement by a government official? What is the right to be free from unreasonable searches and seizures? The truth is, throughout the Bill of Rights section of the Constitution, they all use broad language because they are giving broad guidance to our government officials. Guidance that can evolve over time as our culture evolves over time. The way all terms get defined is through a process. It starts with our government officials, with our legislators, right? With our governors, even with our regulators, who take the first stab through legislation, through regulation, through their decision-making at defining what these terms mean. And if we think that they get it right, if we think that they passed and implemented laws that got it right, great. We, the people, endorse it by doing nothing. But if we think that they really fundamentally got it wrong, and that the way a law was written or the way a law is implemented is infringing or will infringe on constitutional environmental rights, then people go to the courts and judges get involved. And judges use their standard practices for how to interpret language in the law, including in the constitutions. And there are all sorts of principles that they use, standard principles for constitutional interpretation, legislative interpretation. They put all that good knowledge to work, and they help sort it out. And they agree that the government officials got it wrong or got it right, or they tell them that they got it wrong and they have to go back and fix it. And it's an iterative process sometimes, right? And that's the way it works with all Bill of Rights language. The thing is, when you're talking about those other fundamental rights, we've had those in some cases for hundreds of years. So we have hundreds of years of precedent helping us understand what clean water, or sorry, what free speech is, what freedom of religion is, what they do allow, what they don't allow, what are the lines. But yet there are still questions, right? There are still questions and legal challenges. When it comes to environmental rights, we're going to be at the beginning of the process. There is a pre-existing body of law that people will turn to in the first instance. And when necessary, the courts will get involved, but that's the process. So I can't tell you exactly how stable climate is going to be interpreted and defined. That will happen, again, first by legislators and regulators. And when necessary, the people will get involved and potentially the courts, and we'll figure it out. can you talk about how the amendment could impact bills from the start as they are being developed and passed? Are there examples of this happening? So, yeah, so when you think about if a government official is about to pass or is working on a piece of legislation that is going to infringe on somebody's freedom of religion, and their associates, their constituents, somebody comes to them and says, hey, you're working on a law that might impact religious freedom. Well, what's the legislator going to do? They're going to step back and say, you're right. Let me make sure that I craft this law in a way that will not infringe on religious freedom. Or, so they might leave it the way they're pursuing it. They might modify it, right? So that and say, oh my gosh, yeah, I'm going down a bad path. And they might modify it. They might say, you know what, there's no way for me to do this law that won't infringe on religious freedom, so I'm not going to do it. Or there's no way to infringe on this law or to pass this law and not infringe on religious freedoms. But in constitutional law, there are some exceptions for when you are entitled to infringe as a government official. If there's a compelling state interest, right? If you've done your best effort to minimize the level of infringement on the right. So we all know that there are circumstances, right? There are some religions that talk about marrying children, and yet that is prohibited. So, legislators often, there's a compelling state interest. We have a compelling state interest in not allowing, young children to potentially be co-opted that way, right? So that whole mindfulness comes to bear on the environment because all government officials now understand they have this constitutional obligation. And so it becomes part and parcel of their work, just like other constitutional obligations are part and parcel of their work. Are we trying to pass the 28th Amendment to the US Constitution, or are we trying state by state, or both? So states have a tremendous amount of power when it comes to the environment. So we want to take advantage of that. And also constitutional amendments are much more accessible at the state level. So we get a lot of power out of passing a state green amendment when it comes to environmental protection, because there are so many areas that are implicated. But not everything gets addressed. The federal government also has power, right? And a state constitutional obligation isn't going to impact the Congress or the EPA or the president. So what we want and need is we need state green amendments in order to capture the environmental protection values in the arena where the state has authority. And then we also need a federal green amendment to cover those areas where the federal government has authority or has preempted state authority. So we need them both. But state amendments are much more accessible. You have a better chance in Washington state of amending your state constitution in the near term than we have of amending the federal constitution in the near term, right? So, and in addition, in order to get a federal constitutional amendment, we need the support of 3/4 of the states. So strategically, the way I've structured this Green Amendment movement is to say, you know what? The thing that makes the most sense is to go state by state by state by state, passing green amendments, getting the strength and the power of those state level green amendments. And as we're going forth and doing that work, we are educating people. We are educating legislators. We are educating residents about the power and importance of this pathway and really laying the foundation necessary. So in the not too distant future, we will be able to go forth and try to get a federal green amendment. But if we start there without laying that foundation, we will fail. So we need to lay the foundation. Strategically, it just makes sense. Let's take advantage of while we're laying that foundation. Let's get state green amendments at the same time, right? So strategy is state level first, then go to the federal. If people start to try for the federal too soon, truthfully, it's going to blow it because all the energy and resources will be sucked into that failing strategy, and people will ignore the incredible power that can be happening at the state level. Does this nullify, overturn the Citizens United decision, which says that corporations are people and money is speech? No, this would not, right? So not explicitly. So, this is really going to be talking about those places, those spaces, those decisions when the environment is directly implicated. Now, there may be, implications of that, but to think that the Green Amendment is going to strip corporations of their personhood, unfortunately, that's not, I don't see that as an outcome. But I do see, many of the ills that come from corporations having so much power in our states and in our nation. A lot of that now, what we are doing is we are giving more power to the people. So we are in a better position to challenge those bad environmental outcomes. And we're very literally, with the passage of a Green Amendment, we're very literally taking our power back when it comes to environmental protection, right? And not just saying to the state government, go do whatever you want. It's all up to you. We're saying, no. Now it's up to the people. And you can only do it if it's in compliance with our agreement that, you can regulate in the area of the environment as long as you don't infringe on our environmental rights. How does the Green Amendment relate to the movement for rights of nature? So rights of nature is really powerful, and I truly, truly believe in it, but it is a different concept. And so fundamentally, the Green Amendment is anthropocentric, right? It is about people and people's rights, because that's largely how our constitutions are structured, right? It's about the rights of the people holding their government accountable. The rights of nature movement, in very significant part, right, legally, is really about getting people. Another element of it is really about getting people into the courts, so that when there is a violation of law that's resulting in the decimation of a forest, a stream, a wetland, a species, rights of nature says that nature shouldn't have to find a person that's harmed by that pollution or degradation to go into the court on behalf of nature to enforce that law. Nature should be allowed to, get its own lawyer and go in there directly. So it's sort of like, let's cut out the middleman of that injured person. Let's just speak about injured nature. The thing is, what I say about that, and again, I believe in it and I think it's powerful, but fundamentally that's about protecting the laws that are on the books. And we can see that the laws that are on the books are fundamentally failing us when it comes to environmental protection. So if the laws are written in a way that they're designed to permit pollution and degradation of our streams and our rivers, allowing rivers to come into courts to enforce those bad laws gets you a distance, but it doesn't get you where we need to be in terms of at that higher level of environmental protection. And that's what a Green Amendment fundamentally does, is it really, a constitution is above the law. So it really is fundamentally putting in place this higher power that all laws, all government officials, all people are answerable to. So we're raising the bar. Now, I have talked with and thought about and even worked to structure some rights of nature language that a state might want to consider. But it is a strategic question, because while I would suggest that probably everybody believes that people should have a right to clean water and clean air, not everybody believes that nature should have rights. And so if you add rights of nature to the language, if that is the strategic decision, what you are really doing is raising the bar in terms of your ability to achieve success sooner rather than later, because you are going to have a whole body of people that are going to be really concerned about that approach. So strategically, it's a question and it's a decision. And it is fundamentally altering sort of how the Constitution is traditionally written and used, which is another thing to be mindful of. I believe that Green Amendments raise the bar for environmental protection to such a significant degree over time that we are getting really powerful, needed additional protection for nature through the advocacy, right, and the legal rights of people. So I think we get most, if not all, of what we need, except for that idea of whose voice is being carried into the courtroom. I also suggest to people, if there is really an interest in advancing rights of nature, maybe start with the rights of people first, the traditional approach first, get the Green Amendment added to the Constitution. And then as a step two, when you've really brought people along to this heightened level of understanding and awareness, then, and gotten your Green Amendment, then as a step two, maybe work for a rights of nature element, right? And sort of do it step by step, that's a strategic pathway to consider. But ultimately, that kind of decision is not mine to make. That's the decision to be made with the partners or the leaders who are from the actual state. So I want to be part of the partnership. I have a lot to bring to the table, but those kinds of decisions really have to come from the people of the state of Washington. And I wouldn't presume, I have an opinion, but I wouldn't presume to think that my opinion is more important than other people's because it's your state. How did you manage industry's fight back with Pennsylvania's Green Amendment? Our timber industry is really strong here in Washington. So how do we manage it? I mean, the thing is look, we went into the courtroom and we made our case and we had this really powerful language. That's what we had to do. Now we are still battling against the fracking industry. This has not been an instant panacea because the frackers got there first. I believe if we had a living, thriving Green Amendment in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, we could have used it to shield the state from fracking coming in. But the frackers were there first. So we're now in a position, right, of having to sort of grab back the ground and apply the Green Amendment in case by case, context by context. That's what's going to happen in the state of Washington with whatever industries that you have there. You're going to have to use it in different contexts to set powerful precedent that will raise the bar, right, for every permit or decision that follows, and then another precedent, and then another precedent. So that's how it has to work. But the way we did it was we had a great argument. We were very careful about our case selection. We had a great case. We had great lawyers, and we won the day despite the very conservative nature of the court because of that great constitutional language and simply saying, when it comes to constitutional law, you have to look at the plain language that's on the books, and the plain language is clear. The people have a right to pure water, clean air, and a healthy environment, and that has to be protected. And the Bill of Rights placement was essential. In reading through the proposed Green Amendment, it seemed to me that one could incorporate language which appeals to conservative values like responsibility for future generations. I'd propose that one look at rights for future generations rather than rights for nature. So Jeff, a couple of things. So first off, that is one of the reasons why we were so successful in Pennsylvania, because actually we did use those conservative arguments. What we were very clear about is that the Green Amendment, again, is not a grant of new authority. We're not giving government officials more power. We're doing the opposite. This is a restraint on government authority. It's saying that there are limits on what you can do. You may not overreach and infringe, right? And that clarity, that Bill of Rights language, Bill of Rights rights are a restraint on government authority was really powerful, a really powerful part of the ultimate outcome of the case. Because we are using conservative principles and the most powerful legal document, the Bill of Rights of the Constitution, now to serve the environment, which is very powerful. And the language, very much, it is generational. The future generations language is in there. And that was really important to Representative Kanoff, that really be strongly highlighted. So it's in there early. So she did a great job of really doing very powerful, having all of the most powerful elements in there. Are there steps we can take prior to a Green Amendment in Washington state that could help set the stage for the Green Amendment? Amending state law, establishing the mission of ports, giving environment status versus economic development only. The thing is, working for more protective laws in whatever form you do it is a great thing. You're not really laying the foundation or not for a Green Amendment. because there are lots of environmental laws. They're advanced all the time. And that's a good thing. But the Green Amendment really is something fundamentally different. It's about going above the law, right? Putting in place that guiding constitutional obligation, principles, right, language, so that all the laws become answerable to it in terms of their interpretation and their implementation. So it is fundamentally different. So certainly advancing more protective laws is a great thing, but what we really need to do in terms of advancing the Green Amendment is get people to understand that while they believe they have a right to clean water and clean air, they're told that all the time at rallies and from politicians and things, they don't have that right because it's not enforceable. It's just pretty rhetoric. If it's not in the Bill of Rights, if it's not, then it's not a fundamental right that's enforceable. So it might be a human right, it might be an inalienable right, but if it's not enforceable, it's not actually in practicality a real right. And so, you know, this is, so we need people to understand that. We need people to understand that they do have a right to free speech. They do have a right to bear arms, but they don't have a right to a clean and healthy glass of water out of their faucet or breath of fresh air that's not going to make them fall down on the ground with a heart attack or an asthma attack because the local industrial operator perfectly legally got a permit to spew that level of pollution into the air. Right? We need people to understand that environmental racism is embraced by our laws. It's how those laws are used day to day, very legally, but a Green Amendment can help change that, right? So we just, all the kinds of things I talked about, that's what we do to lay the foundation for a Green Amendment, is really help people understand what the problem is and how a Green Amendment can help solve it. Okay, I'm going up. Following John's question, 2/3 of both chambers, what is the strategy or message to secure bipartisan support in Washington's legislature? So that will be, you know, a strategy that has to be pursued by our legislative champions in combination with whatever coalition evolves to make that happen. That is certainly a high priority in other states, and I can tell you is successful. A number of other states, there is bipartisan support, even bipartisan leadership on advancing a Green Amendment. So that is an important and valuable strategy. And I'm very clear to people that the Green Amendment's not a partisan issue because we all need clean water and clean air. And it's actually one of the beautiful things is that we have gotten some really conservative legislators to come on and support. As soon as we can get them to understand this is not about crashing all economic development or industry or anything. It's just making sure that as it advances in a way that's protective of the environment. It's not going to result in an onslaught of litigation, right? It's only going to help support important litigation necessary to address important social issues. So all these sort of little once we can get them to understand that this is real value added, there's been great success in bringing on bipartisan support because clean water and clean air is not a partisan issue. Are there any others, Molly, that I'm missing, or is there anybody? What were the good points discussed in the Washington state legislation 2020-2021? So I'd have to go back and remember. I think some of it is what was discussed there, but some of it also is lessons learned in other states. So I'd really have to go back because I have notes on all of that, but I don't have, there's some stuff, there's some, yes, there are just things in there about different words or word choice. And that's something that would be part of and will be part of the discussion with Representative Kanoff and any leaders who want to help advance this to make sure everybody understands and is on board. But I have to be honest with you, I didn't review those notes before this talk, so it's not all forefront of my mind.
Maya, somebody asked about the obstacles that can end up being in the way and how we could defeat them.
Okay, which obstacles? Or just generally obstacles?
Yeah, in the process and getting it passed.
Yeah, I mean, so the obstacles are going to be, a constitutional amendment is a heavy lift. You do need, right? I have to go back and look. Washington State. We have a fact sheet on the website about what the constitutional process is, but there's a higher bar for securing a constitutional amendment in terms of legislative passage, but the governor doesn't have a role. So once you get it through the legislative process, the governor doesn't get to veto it. It goes to the people. So it's harder, it's easier, but it's also, once you get it, it's stronger because it'll also be harder to roll back. And a lot of it are some of the basic fundamentals, the kinds of things you asked about. Legislators want to know, how are the terms going to be defined? Will this crash economic development? Why do we need this? They're just, so a lot of it is getting people to understand. And there will be industry opposition, and they will say that this is a job killer, and they will say that it will kill all economic development. And we will have all of those false narratives, and we have good answers to them all. And as they come up, we will respond to them. A lot of the big hurdles is just getting people educated. Like having the opportunity to speak with you all tonight is fantastic, because you can all now be Green Amendment leaders. And actually, one of the things we do in states, right, is we do trainings. They can be on Zoom, they can be in person, to help people feel more and more comfortable talking about this, so they can go out and help spread the word, right? This is a real collaborative effort when it gets going in a state. But we know what the challenges will be, and we take them on. And if you go to wagreenamendment.org, you'll find a talking points sheet, and you'll find a lot of resources, and you'll see some frequently asked questions, and you'll be able to see what are some of the usual challenges. And then it's just a matter of people being prepared to take them on. And also the other thing is preventing challenges on the language, like it shouldn't be in the Bill of Rights. It absolutely must be in the Bill of Rights. For example, if you tried to take it out of the Bill of Rights, I'd be your opposition, right? So there are basic fundamentals that are must-haves, and we also need to make sure people know what they are. Somebody asked about how do we combat the name that could be associated with the Green New Deal. So first off, the Green Amendment existed first. My book was published first, and then the Green New Deal showed up. So that was really annoying. But the truth is what we have found is a couple of things. First off, the Green Amendment name actually has a level of a pretty high level of resonance at this point. If people go online and search for Green Amendment, there's all kinds of stuff that comes up. So running away from the name actually can do a disservice. It can create confusion. And then you lose the benefit of all the synergy of what's happening in different states where the Green Amendment is the actual term that's used in the day-to-day parlance. It's not necessarily in the title of the constitutional amendment, but it's how it gets talked about by legislators and people and supporters. So I think that the better thing to do really is to be clear with people about that the Green Amendment is not the Green New Deal, how it's different, what it does, and how it's value added. So we get the benefit of the synergy. But yeah, the truth is there was in one state, they actually did decide to go under another name. And then a couple of months later, suddenly found out that there was some big new industry that was advancing legislation by the same name. So you're always going to have those things crop up and pop up. The best thing is, I think, for us just to embrace the language and run with it. But if Washington State wants to use something different, then we just have to figure out what would work and how we manage that. Anything else? We are at 9:10, so we're kind of over time, and I don't want to make people stay late. But if you're, Representative Kanoff has been a wonderful champion. She's so engaged. And so if you are interested in this idea and getting involved and helping to make it happen, we do have a petition online. You can put your email in the chat and we can find ways to follow up. We have a great champion in Washington State. What we don't have is that grassroots movement, and that grassroots movement needs a couple of leaders to step up and work with us. And I will tell you, in other states, Sometimes those leaders are organizations, sometimes they're individuals. Our two most powerful movements at this point, Maine and New Mexico, or amongst our two most powerful, both started because one person called me and we went from there. And in Washington, you've got this great champion, this great language, like it is already off the ground. It's a matter now of giving Representative Kanoff the support she needs to for the good work that she's doing. Lots of kudos for Deborah Kanoff, longtime climate champion, and there are so many climate benefits out of the Green Amendment, which is wonderful. Our state senator is Liz Lovelet, who is excellent too, and we're very lucky, but we need more of this kind of leadership across the state. Always need great leadership. MA has a good question, see above. MA. What were the, we did the what were the good points? And I said I didn't review my notes in time for the talk. Is there, or was it that one? Was that the question?
I think that was the question. Somebody else also asked just where Washington was in the process in comparison to other states.
Yeah, so Washington is much earlier. Well, it's sort of a mixed bag. It's kind of hard. Washington has great language and a legislative champion. A lot of other states are interested in the idea and are struggling for that. What Washington needs is that grassroots movement to really come together so that we can all start to, work together to give her the support she needs. New York State is actually about to go to a vote before the public. It actually made it through its legislative process, and November 2nd, there'll be a vote on the New York Green Amendment. New Mexico, Hawaii, and Maine all have powerful champions and growing grassroots efforts supporting those champions. There'll be legislative proposals that I think will get some powerful backing. And there's thought that in those 3 states and potentially New Jersey, there may actually be first passage for some of those states that require it more than once. New Mexico, actually, the legislators, it's just majority vote, both houses one time, and it goes before the people. So it's all over the place in different states. Some states, West Virginia, we just have really powerful champions, but they recognize that politically now is not the time. So they keep proposing the language in order to protect it from being co-opted by a bad actor, but really are sort of holding tight on the grassroots because it's just not the right time according to the people of that state. So we support that. So it's a mixed bag, but you got a great champion and you got great language, and what she needs is your help to back her up. And with that, I think, this can really make great progress. And having something to point to and talk about is really powerful for getting people engaged. It's more than me just telling you, hey, here's this great idea. What do you think about it? It's here's this great idea. What do you think about it? If you want it, here you go, right? You just have to get behind what Deborah Kanoff is already doing. So, all righty. So we're at 9:15. Should we sort of say to people, if you're interested and want to get involved, put your information in the chat. Oh, yes, David.
Yeah, I just want to mention that there is a small coalition of grassroots people who have organized this today. And I think we're going to follow up with a poll to see who else is interested, if that's okay with people. And there were 60-something people signed up for this call. So people got informed. Now we'll follow up with an opportunity to become part of the coalition, the small grassroots coalition that has already started. And I want to thank you, Maya, for being here, and Molly, you too, on the occupied land of the Duwamish and Coast Salish people, whose culture and spirit of protecting the environment we try and respect and follow. But there will be a follow-up to this for people to get deeper involved.
So thank you for that, David. And thank you for correcting me, because yes, we do have a growing movement in Washington, and David is going to be your go-to with the people that he's been bringing together. And I'm so grateful for all of them. And so that is the most important starting place. And I don't know, David, do you want to put your email in the chat and have people get in direct contact? What's the best way? Because, you're our lead partner And so we want to make sure we honor whatever process you want to follow.
Yeah, there goes my email in the chat, and we will follow up too. We will follow up directly to people who signed up for this.
So thank you, David, for all your great work and for hosting this. And thank you, everybody, for showing up. And thank you, Representative Kanoff's team, who I think are still on, for being here and for all your hard work.
Thank you.